river. "Oh, God, this is divine," Sally murmured. "I have this deep thing about the countryside." "You've got this deep thing, period," said Gaskell, steering the cruiser erratically towards a lock. He was wearing a captain's cap and sunglasses. "Cliché, baby," said Sally. "We're coming to a lock," said Eva anxiously. "There are some men there." "Men? Oh, forget men, darling. There's just you and me and G, and G's not a man, are you, G, baby?" "I have my moments," said Gaskell. "But so seldom, so awfully seldom," Sally said. "Anyway, what does it matter? We're here, idyllic style, cruising down the river in the good old summertime." "Shouldn't we have cleared the house up before we left?" Eva asked. "The secret of parties is not to clear up afterward, but to clear off. We can do all that when we get back." Eva got up and went below. They were quite near the lock, and she wasn't going to be stared at in the nude by two old men sitting on the bench beside it. "Jesus, Sally, can't you do something about soulmate? She's getting on my teats," said Gaskell. "Oh, gee, baby, she's never. If she did, you'd Cheshire cat." "Cheshire cat?" "Disappear with a smile, honey child, fetus first. She's but positively, gargantuanly uterine." "She's but positively, gargantuanly boring." "Time, lover, time. You've got to accentuate the liberated, eliminate the negative, and not mess with Mr. In-Between." "Not mess with Mrs. In-Between. Operative word, Mrs.," said Gaskell, bumping the boat into the lock. "But that's the whole point." "What is?" said Gaskell. "Messing with Mrs. In-Between. I mean, it's always with Eva and us. She does the housework. Gaskell, baby, can play ship's captain and tit-fist on boobs. And Sally, sweetie, can minotaur her labyrinthine mind." "Mind?" said Gaskell. "Polyunsaturated hasn't got a mind. And talking of cretins, what about Mr. In-Between?" "He's got Judy to mess with. He's probably screwing her now, and tomorrow night he'll sit up and watch Kojak with her. Who knows, he may even send her off to Mavis Contracuntal Mottram's flower arrangement evening. I mean, they're suited. You can't say he wasn't hooked on her last night." "You can say that again," said Gaskell, and closed the lock gates. As the cruiser floated downwards, the two old men sitting on the bench stared at Sally. She took off her sunglasses and glared at them. "Don't blow your prostates, senior citizens," she said rudely. "Haven't you seen a fanny before?" "You talking to me?" said one of the men. "I wouldn't be talking to myself." "And I'll tell you," said the man. "I've seen one like yours before. Once." "Once is about right," said Sally. "Where?" "On an old cow as had just dropped her calf," said the man, and spat into a neat bed of geraniums. In the cabin, Eva sat and wondered what they were talking about. She listened to the lapping of the water and the throb of the engine, and thought about Henry. It wasn't like him to do a thing like that, it really wasn't. And in front of all those people. Must have been drunk. It was so humiliating. Well, he could suffer. Sally said men ought to be made to suffer. It was part of the process of liberating yourself from them. You had to show them that you didn't need them, and violence was the only thing the male psyche understood. That was why she was so harsh with Gaskell. Men were like animals. You had to show them who was master. Eva went through to the galley and polished the stainless steel sink. Henry would have to learn how important she was by missing her, and doing the housework and cooking for himself, and when she got back, she would give him such a telling off about that doll. I mean, it wasn't natural. Perhaps Henry ought to go and see a psychiatrist. Sally said he'd made the most horrible suggestion to her, too. It only went to show that you couldn't trust anyone. And Henry, of all people. She would never have imagined Henry would think of doing anything like that. But Sally had been so sweet and understanding. She knew how women felt, and she hadn't been angry with Henry. "It's just that he's a sphincter baby," she said. "It's symptomatic of a male-dominated chauvinist pig society. I've never known an MCP who didn't say, 'Bugger you,' and mean it." "Henry's always saying bugger," Eve had admitted. It's bugger this and bugger that. There you are, Eva, baby. What did I tell you? It's semantic degradation anal-wise. It's bloody disgusting, said Eva, and so it was. She went on polishing and cleaning until they were clear of the lock and steering down river towards an open water of the Broads. Then she went up onto the deck and sat looking out over the flat, empty landscape at the sunset. It was all so romantic and exciting, so different from anything that she'd known before. This was life as she'd always dreamt it might be, rich and gay and fulfilling. Eva Wilt sighed. In spite of everything, she was at peace with the world. In the car park back at the Tech, Henry Wilt wasn't at peace with anything. On the contrary, he was at war with Eva's replica. As he stumbled drunkenly round the car and struggled with Judy, he was conscious that even an inflatable doll had a will of its own when it came to being dragged out of small cars. Judy's arms and legs got caught in things. If Eva behaved in the same way on the night of her disposal, he'd have the devil's own job getting her out of the car. He would have to tie her in a neat bundle. That'd be the best thing to do. Finally, by tugging at the doll's legs, he hauled her out and laid her on the ground. Then he got back into the car to look for her wig. He found it under the seat, and after rearranging Judy's skirt so that it wasn't quite so revealing, he put the wig on her head. He looked round the car park at the terrapin huts and the main building, but there was no one to be seen. All clear. He picked up the doll and, carrying it under his arm, set off towards the building site. Halfway there, he realized that he wasn't doing it properly. Eva, drugged and sleeping, would be far too heavy to carry under his arm. He would have to use a fireman's lift. Wilt stopped and hoisted the doll onto his back, and set off again, weaving erratically, partly because, thanks to the gin, he couldn't help it, and partly because it added verisimilitude to the undertaking. With Eva over his shoulder, he'd be bound to weave a bit. He reached the fence and dropped the doll over. In the process, the wig fell off again. Wilt groped round in the mud and found it. Then he went round to the gate. It was locked. It would be. He'd have to remember that. Details like that were important. He tried to climb over, but couldn't. He needed something to give him a leg up. A bicycle. There were usually some in the racks by the main gate. Stuffing the wig into his pocket, Wilt made his way round the terrapin huts and past the canteen, and was just crossing the grass by the language lab when a figure appeared out of the darkness and a torch shone in his face. It was the caretaker. "Here, what are you doing? Where do you think you're going?" the caretaker asked. Wilt halted. I've come back to get some notes from the staff room." "Oh, it's you, Mr. Wilt," said the caretaker. "Oh, you should know by now that you can't get in at this time of night. We lock up at 9:30. "No, I'm sorry, I forgot," said Wilt. The caretaker sighed. "Oh, since it's you, and just this once," he said, and unlocked the door to the General Studies building. "You'll have to walk up. Lifts don't work at this time of night. I'll wait for you down here." Wilt staggered slowly up 5 flights of stairs to the staff room and went to his locker. He took out a handful of papers and a copy of Bleak House he'd been meaning to take home for some months and hadn't. He stuffed the notes into his pocket and found the wig. While he was about it, he might as well pick up an elastic band. That'd keep the wig on Judy's head. He found some in a box in the stationery cupboard, stuffed the notes into his other pocket, and went downstairs. "Thanks very much," he told the caretaker. "Sorry to have bothered you." He wove off round the corner to the bike sheds. "Pest as a newt," said the caretaker, and went back into his office. Wilt watched him light his pipe, and then turned his attention to the bicycles. The bloody things were all locked. He'd just have to carry one round. He put Bleak House in the basket, picked the bike up, and carried it all the way round to the fence. Then he climbed up and over, and groped around in the darkness for the doll. In the end, he found it, and spent 5 minutes trying to keep the wig on while he fastened the elastic band under the chin. It kept on jumping off. "Well, at least that's one problem I won't have with Eva," he muttered to himself when the wig was secured. Having satisfied himself that it wouldn't come off, he moved cautiously forward, skirting mounds of gravel, machines, sacks, and reinforcing rods, when it suddenly occurred to him that he was running a considerable risk of disappearing down one of the pile holes himself. He put the doll down and fumbled in his pocket for the torch and shone it on the ground. Some yards ahead there was a large square of thick plywood. Wilt moved forward and lifted it. Underneath was the hole. A nice big hole. Just the right size. She would fit in there perfectly. He shone the torch down. Must be 30 feet deep. He pushed the plywood to one side and went back for the doll. The wig had fallen off again. "Fuck," said Wilt, and reached in his pocket for another elastic band. 5 minutes later, Judy's wig was firmly in place with 4 elastic bands fastened under her chin. That should do it. Now all he had to do was to drag the replica to the hole and make sure it fitted. At this point, Wilt hesitated. He was beginning to have doubts about the soundness of the scheme. Too many unexpected contingencies had arisen for his liking. On the other hand, there was a sense of exhilaration about being alone on the building site in the middle of the night. Perhaps it would be better if he went home now. No, he had to see the thing through. He'd put the doll into the hole and make quite sure that it fitted. Then he would deflate it and go home and repeat the process until he'd trained himself to kill by proxy. He'd keep the doll in the boot of the car. Eva never looked there. And in future, he would only blow her up when he reached the car park. That way, Eva would have no idea what was going on. Definitely not. Wilt smiled to himself at the simplicity of the scheme. Then he picked Judy up and pushed her towards the hole feet first. She slid in easily, while Wilt leant forward. Perfect. And at that moment, he slipped on the muddy ground. With a desperate effort which necessitated letting go of the doll, he hurled himself to one side and grabbed at the plywood. He got to his feet cautiously and cursed. His trousers were covered with mud, and his hands were shaking. "Damn near went down myself," he muttered, and looked round for Judy. But Judy had disappeared. Wilt reached for his torch and shone it down the hole. Halfway down, the doll was wedged lightly against the sides, and for once the wig was still on. Wilt stared desperately down at the thing and wondered what the hell to do. It, or she, must be at least 20 feet down. 15. Anyway, a long way down and certainly too far for him to reach, but still too near the top not to be clearly visible to the workmen in the morning. Wilt switched off the torch and pulled the plywood square so that it covered the hole. That way he wouldn't be in danger of joining the doll. Then he stood up and tried to think of ways of getting it out. Rope with a hook on the end of it? He hadn't a rope or a hook. He might be able to find a rope, but hooks were another matter. Get a rope and tie it to something and climb down it and bring the doll up? Certainly not. It would be bad enough climbing down the rope with 2 hands, but to think of climbing back up with 1 hand, holding the doll in the other, was sheer lunacy. That way he would end up at the bottom of the hole himself. And if one thing was clear in his mind, it was that he didn't intend to be discovered at the bottom of a 30-foot pile hole on Monday morning, clutching a plastic fucking doll with a cunt, dressed in his wife's clothes. That way lay disaster. Wilt visualized the scene in the principal's office as he tried to explain how he came to be. And anyway, they might not find him, or hear his yells. Those damned cement lorries made a hell of a din. And he bloody well wasn't going to risk being buried under... shit. Talk about poetic justice. No, the only thing to do was to get that fucking doll down to the bottom of the hole and hope to hell that no one had spotted it before they poured the concrete in. Well, at least that way he would learn if it was a sensible method of getting rid of Eva. There was that to be said about it. Every cloud had... Wilt left the hole and looked round for something to move Judy down to the bottom. He tried a handful of gravel, but she merely wobbled a bit and stayed put. Something weightier was needed. He went across to a pile of sand and scooped some into a plastic sack and poured it down the hole. But apart from adding an extra dimension of macabre realism to Mrs. Wilt's wig, the sand did nothing. Perhaps if he dropped a brick on the doll, it would burst. Wilt looked around for a brick and ended up with a large lump of clay. That would do. He dropped it down the hole. There was a thump, a rattle of gravel, and another thump. Wilt shone his torch down. Judy had reached the bottom of the hole and had settled into a grotesque position with her legs crumpled up in front of her and one arm outstretched towards him as if in supplication. Wilt fetched another lump of clay and hurled it down. This time the wig slid sideways and her head lolled. Wilt gave up. There was nothing more he could do. He pulled the plywood back over the hole and went back to the fence. Here he ran into more trouble. The bicycle was on the other side. He fetched a plank, leant it against the fence, and climbed over. Now to carry the bike back to the shed. Oh, bugger the bike, it could stay where it was. He was fed up with the whole business. He couldn't even dispose of a plastic doll properly. It was ludicrous to think that he could plan, commit, and carry through a real murder with any hope of success. Must have been mad to think of it. It was all that blasted gin. That's right, blame the gin, Wilt muttered to himself as he trudged back to his car. He had this idea months ago. He climbed into the car and sat there in the darkness, wondering what on earth had ever possessed him to have fantasies of murdering Eva. It was insane, utterly insane. And just as mad to imagine that he could train himself to become a cold-blooded killer. Where had that idea originated from? What was it all about? All right, Eva was a stupid cow who made his life a misery by nagging at him and indulging a taste for Eastern mysticism with a frenetic enthusiasm calculated to derange the soberest of husbands. But why his obsession with murder? Why the need to prove his manliness by violence? Where had he got that from? In the middle of the car park, Henry Wilt, suddenly sober and clear-headed, realized the extraordinary effect that 10 years of liberal studies had had upon him. For 10 long years, Plasterers 2 and Meat 1 had been exposed to culture in the shape of Wilt and the Lord of the Flies. And for as many years, Wilt himself had been exposed to the barbarity, the unhesitating readiness to commit violence of Plasterers 2 and Meat 1. That was the genesis of it all. That and the unreality of the literature he'd been forced to absorb. For 10 years, Wilt had been the duct along which travelled creatures of imagination, Nostromo, Jack and Piggy, Shane, creatures who acted and whose actions affected something. And all the time he saw himself mirrored in their eyes, an ineffectual, passive person responding solely to the dictates of circumstances. Wilt shook his head, and out of all that and the traumas of the last 2 days had been born this acte gratuit, this semi-crime, the symbolic murder of Eva Wilt. He started the car and drove out of the car park. He'd go and see the brain trees. They'd still be up and glad to see him, and besides, he needed to talk to someone. Behind him on the building site, his notes on violence and the break-up of family life drifted about in the night wind and stuck in the mud. 7. Nature is so libidinous, said Sally, shining a torch through the porthole at the reeds. I mean, take bulrushes. I mean, they're positively archetypally phallus. Don't you think so, G? Bulrushes, said Gaskell, gazing helplessly at a chart. Bulrushes do nothing for me. Maps neither, by the looks of it. Charts, baby, charts. What's in a name? Right now, a hell of a lot. We're either in Frogwater Reach or Fen Broad. No telling which. Oh, give me Fen Broad every time. I adore broads. Eva, sweetheart, how's about another pot of coffee? I want to stay awake all night and watch the dawn come up over the bulrushes. Yes, well, I don't, said Gaskell. Last night was enough for me, that crazy guy with the doll in the bath and Shy cutting himself. That's enough for one day. I am going to hit the sack. The deck, said Sally. Hit the deck. Eva and I are sleeping down here. 3's a crowd. 3? With boobs around, it's 5 at least. Okay, so I sleep on deck. We've got to be up early if we're to get off this damn sandbank. Has Captain Pringsheim stranded us, baby? It's these charts. If only they'd given an exact indication of depth. If you knew where we were, you'd probably find they do. It's no use knowing it's 3 feet. Fathoms, honey, fathoms. 3 fathoms in Frogwater Reach if we're really in Fen Broad. Well, wherever we are, you better start hoping there's a tide that'll rise and float us off, said Gaskell. And if there isn't? Well, we'll just have to think of something else. Maybe someone will come along and tow us off. Oh, God, gee, you're the skillfulest, said Sally. I mean, why couldn't we have just stayed out in the middle? But no, you had to come steaming up this creek, wham into a mud bank, and all because of what? Ducks. Goddamn ducks. Waders, baby, waders, not just ducks. Okay, so they're waders. You want to photograph them so now we're stuck where no one in their right minds would come in a boat. Who do you think's going to come up here? Jonathan Seagull? In the galley, Eva made coffee. She was wearing the bright red plastic bikini Sally had lent her. It was rather too small for her, so that she bulged round it uncomfortably, and it was revealingly tight. But at least it was better than going round naked, even though Sally said nudity was being liberated and look at the Amazonian Indians. She should have brought her own things, but Sally had insisted on hurrying, and now all she had were the lemon loungers and the bikini. Honesty, Sally was so author-something. Well, bossy, then. Dual-purpose plastic, baby, apron-wise, she'd said. And G has this thing about plastic, haven't you, G? Biodegradably, yes. Biodegradably? Asked Eva, hoping to be initiated into some new aspect of women's liberation. Plastic bottles that disintegrate instead of lying round making an ecological swamp, said Sally, opening a porthole and dropping an empty cigar packet over the side. That's G's life's work. That and recyclability, infinite recyclability. Right, said Gaskell. We've got inbuilt obsolescence in the automotive field, where it's outmoded. So what we need now is inbuilt biodegradable deliquescence in ephemera. Eva listened uncomprehendingly, but with the feeling that she was somehow at the center of an intellectual world far surpassing that of Henry and his friends, who talked about new degree courses and their students so boringly. We've got a compost heap at the bottom of the garden, she said when she finally understood what they were talking about. I put the potato peelings and odds and ends on it. Gaskell raised his eyes to the cabin roof. Correction, deckhead. Talking of odds and ends, said Sally, running a fond hand over Eva's bottom, I wonder how Henry's getting along with Judy. Eva shuddered. The thought of Henry and the doll lying in the bath still haunted her. I can't think what had got into him, she said, and looked disapprovingly at Gaskell when he sniggered. I mean, it's not as if he's ever been unfaithful or anything like that. And lots of husbands are. Patrick Mottram's always going off and having affairs with other women, but Henry's been very good in that respect. He may be quiet and not very pushing, but no one could call him a gadabout. Oh, sure, said Gaskell. So he's got a hang-up about sex. My heart bleeds for him. I don't see why you should say he's got something wrong with him, because he's faithful, said Eva. Oh, G didn't mean that, did you, G? Said Sally. He meant that there has to be true freedom in a marriage. No dominance, no jealousy, no possession. Right, G? Right, said Gaskell. The test of true love is when you can watch your wife having it off with someone else and still love her, Sally went on. Oh, I could never watch Henry, said Eva. Never. So you don't love him. You're insecure. You don't trust him. Trust him, said Eva. If Henry went to bed with another woman, I don't see how I could trust him. I mean, if that's what he wants to do, why did he marry me? That, said Gaskell, is the $64,000 question. He picked up his sleeping bag and went out on deck. Behind him, Eva had begun to cry. Oh, there, said Sally, putting her arm round her. G was just kidding. He didn't mean anything. "Oh, it's not that," said Eva. "It's just that I don't understand anything anymore. It's all so complicated." "Christ, you look bloody awful," said Peter Braintree as Wilt stood on the doorstep. "I feel bloody awful," said Wilt. "It's all that gin." "You mean Eva's not back?" said Braintree, leading the way down the passage to the kitchen. "She wasn't there when I got home. Just a note saying she was going away with the Pringsheims to think things over." "To think things over? Eva? What things?" "Well," Wilt began and thought better of it. "That business with Sally, I suppose. She says she won't ever forgive me." "But you didn't do anything with Sally? That's what you told me." "I know I didn't. That's the whole point. If I'd done what that nymphomaniac bitch wanted, there wouldn't have been all this bloody trouble." "Well, I don't see that, Henry. I mean, if you'd done what she wanted, Eva would have had something to grumble about. I don't see why she should be up in the air because you didn't." "Sally must have told her I did do something," said Wilt, determined not to mention the incident in the bathroom with the doll. "Oh, you mean the blowjob?" "I don't know what I mean." "What is a blowjob, anyway?" Peter Braintree looked puzzled. "I'm not too sure," he said. "But it's obviously something you don't want your husband to do. If I came home and told Betty I'd done a blowjob, she'd think I'd been robbing a bank." "Well, I wasn't going to do it anyway," said Wilt. "She was going to do it to me." "Well, perhaps it's a suck-off," said Braintree, putting a kettle on the stove. "That's what it sounds like to me." "Well, it didn't sound like that to me," said Wilt with a shudder. "She made it sound like a paint-peeling exercise with a blow lamp. You should have seen the look on her face." He sat down at the kitchen table despondently. Braintree eyed him curiously. "Well, you certainly seem to have been in the wars," he said. Wilt looked down at his trousers. They were covered with mud and there were round patches caked to his knees. "Yes, well, I had a puncture on the way here," he explained with lack of conviction. "I had to change a tire and I knelt down. I was a bit pissed." Peter Braintree grunted doubtfully. It didn't sound very convincing to him. Poor old Henry was obviously a bit under the weather. "I can wash up in the sink," he said. Presently Betty Braintree came downstairs. "I couldn't help hearing what you said about Eva," she said. "I'm so sorry, Henry." "I wouldn't worry. She's bound to come back." "I wouldn't be too sure," said Wilt gloomily. "Anyway, I'm not so sure I want her back." "Oh, Eva's all right," Betty said. "She gets these sudden urges and enthusiasms, but they don't last long. It's just the way she's made. It's easy come and easy go with Eva." "I think that's what's worrying Henry," said Braintree. "The easy come bit." "Oh, surely not. Eva isn't that sort at all." Wilt sat at the kitchen table and sipped his coffee. "I wouldn't put anything past her in the company she's keeping now," he muttered lugubriously. "Remember what happened when she went through that macrobiotic diet phase? Dr. Mannix told me that I was the nearest thing to a case of scurvy he'd seen since the Burma Railway. Then there was that episode with the trampoline. She went to a Keep Fit class at Bulham Village College and bought herself a fucking trampoline. You know, she put old Mrs. Portway in hospital with that contraption." "I knew there was some sort of accident, but Eva never told me what actually happened," said Betty. "She wouldn't. It's a ruddy miracle we didn't get sued," said Wilt. "It threw Mrs. Portway clean through the greenhouse roof. There was glass all over the lawn, and it wasn't even as though Mrs. Portway was a healthy woman at the best of times." "Wasn't she that woman with rheumatoid arthritis?" Wilt nodded dismally. "And the duelling scars on her face," he said. "That was our greenhouse, that was." "Well, I must say I can think of better places for trampolines than greenhouses," said Braintree. "It wasn't a very big greenhouse, was it?" "It wasn't a very big trampoline either, thank God," said Wilt. "She'd have been in orbit otherwise." "Oh, it all goes to prove one thing," said Betty, looking on the bright side. "Eva may do crazy things, but she soon gets over them." "Mrs. Portway didn't," said Wilt, not to be comforted. "She was in hospital for 6 weeks, and the skin grafts didn't take. Hasn't been near our house since. You see, Eva will get fed up with these Pringsheim people in a week or two. They're just another fad. A fad with a lot of advantages, if you ask me, said Wilt. Money, status, and sexual promiscuity. All the things I couldn't give her, and dressed up with a lot of intellectual claptrap about women's lib, and violence, and the intolerance of tolerance, and the revolution of the sexes, and you're not fully mature until you're ambisextrous. It's enough to make you vomit. And it's just the sort of crap Eva would fall for. I mean, she'd buy rotten herrings if some clown up the social scale told her they were the sophisticated things to eat. Talk about being gullible. The thing is that Eva's got too much energy, said Betty. You should try and persuade her to get a full-time job. Full-time job, said Wilt. She's had more full-time jobs than I've had hot dinners. Mind you, that's not saying much these days. All I ever get's a cold supper and a note saying she's gone to pottery or transcendental meditation or something equally half-baked. And anyway, Eva's idea of a job is to take over the factory. Remember Potter's, that engineering firm that went broke after a strike a couple of years ago? Well, if you ask me, that was Eva's fault. She got this job with a consultancy firm doing time and motion study. They sent her out to the factory, and the next thing anyone knew, they had a strike on their hands. They went on talking for another hour, until the Braintrees asked him to stay the night. But Wilt wouldn't. I've got things to do tomorrow. Such as? Feed the dog, for one thing. Oh, you can always drive over and do that. Clem won't starve overnight. But Wilt was too immersed in self-pity to be persuaded, and besides, he was still worried about that doll. He might have another go at getting the thing out of that hole. He drove home and went to bed in a tangle of sheets and blankets. He hadn't made it in the morning. Poor old Henry, said Betty as she and Peter went upstairs. He did look pretty awful. Oh, he said he had a puncture and had to change the wheel. Now, I wasn't thinking of his clothes. It was the look on his face that worried me. You don't think he's on the verge of a nervous breakdown? Peter Braintree shook his head. You'd look like that if you had gas fitters 3 and plasterers 2 every day of your life for 10 years and then your wife ran away, he told her. Why don't they give him something better to teach? Why? Because the tech wants to become a poly and they keep starting new degree courses and hiring people with PhDs to teach them, and then the students don't enroll and they're lumbered with specialists like Dr. Fitzpatrick, who knows all there is to know about child labour in 4 cotton mills in Manchester in 1837. And damn all about anything else. Put him in front of a class of day-release apprentices and all hell would break loose. As it is, I have to go into his A-level classes once a week and tell them to shut up. On the other hand, Henry looks meek, but he can cope with rowdies. He's too good at his job, that's his trouble. And besides, he's not a bum-sucker, and that's the kiss of death at the tech. If you don't lick arses, you get nowhere. You know, said Betty, teaching at that place has done horrible things to your language. It's done horrible things to my outlook on life, never mind my language, said Braintree. It's enough to drive a man to drink. Well, said Betty, it certainly seems to have done that to Henry. His breath reeked of gin. Oh, he'll get over it. But Wilt didn't. He woke in the morning with the feeling that something was missing, quite apart from Eva. That bloody doll. He lay in bed trying to think of some way of retrieving the thing before the workmen arrived on the site on Monday morning, but apart from pouring a can of petrol down the hole and lighting it, which seemed on reflection the best way of drawing attention to the fact that he had stuffed a plastic doll dressed in his wife's clothes down there, he could think of nothing practical. He'd just have to trust to luck. When the Sunday papers came, he got out of bed and went down to read them over his All-Bran. Then he fed the dog and mooched about the house in his pyjamas, walked down to the Ferry Path Inn for lunch, slept in the afternoon, and watched the box all evening. Then he made the bed and got into it, and spent a restless night wondering where Eva was, what she was doing, and why, since he'd occupied so many fruitless hours speculating on ways of getting rid of her homicidally, he should be in the least concerned now that she'd gone off of her own accord. I mean, if I didn't want this to happen, why did I keep thinking up ways of killing her? He thought at 2 o'clock. Sane people don't go for walks with a Labrador and devise schemes for murdering their wives when they can just as easily divorce them. There was probably some foul psychological reason for it. Wilt could think of several himself, rather too many, in fact, to be able to decide which was the most likely one. In any case, a psychological explanation demanded a degree of self-knowledge, which Wilt, who wasn't at all sure that he had a self to know, felt was denied him. 10 years of plasterers too, and exposure to barbarism, had at least given him the insight to know that there was an answer for every question, and it didn't much matter what answer you gave, so long as you gave it convincingly. In the 14th century, they would have said the devil put such thoughts into his head. Now, in a post-Freudian world, it had to be a complex, or to be really up-to-date, a chemical imbalance. In 100 years, they would have come up with some completely different explanation. With the comforting thought that the truths of one age were the absurdities of another, and it didn't much matter what you thought, so long as you did the right thing, and in his view he did, Wilt finally fell asleep. At 7 he was woken by the alarm clock, and by 8:30 had parked his car in the parking lot behind the tech. He walked past the building site, where the workmen were already at work. Then he went up to the staff room and looked out of the window. The square of plywood was still in place, covering the hole, but the pile-boring machine had been backed away. They had evidently finished with it. At 5 to 9 he collected 25 copies of Shane from the cupboard and took them across to Motor Mechanics 3. Shane was the ideal soporific. It would keep the brutes quiet while he sat and watched what happened down below. Room 593 in the engineering block gave him a grandstand view. Wilt filled in the register and handed out copies of Shane and told the class to get on with it. He said it with a good deal more vigour than was usual, even for a Monday morning, and the class settled down to consider the plight of the homesteaders, while Wilt stared out of the window, absorbed in a more immediate drama.
That is the end of this side. The story continues on the next cassette. Side 5.
A lorry with a revolving drum filled with liquid concrete had arrived on the site and was backing slowly towards the plywood square. It stopped, and there was an agonizing wait while the driver climbed down from the cab and lit a cigarette. Another man, evidently the foreman, came out of a wooden hut and wandered across to the lorry, and presently a little group was gathered round the hole. Wilt got up from his desk and went over to the window. Why the hell didn't they get a move on? Finally, the driver got back into his cab, and 2 men removed the plywood. The foreman signalled to the driver, the chute for the concrete was swung into position. Another signal, the drum began to tilt. The concrete was coming. Wilt watched as it began to pour down the chute, and just at that moment, the foreman looked down the hole. So did one of the workmen. The next instant, all hell had broken loose. There were frantic signals and shouts from the foreman. Through the window, Wilt watched the open mouths and the gesticulations, but still the concrete came. Wilt shut his eyes and shuddered. They had found that fucking doll. Outside, on the building site, the air was thick with misunderstanding. "What's that? I'm pouring as fast as I can!" shouted the driver, misconstruing the frenzied signals of the foreman. He pulled the lever still further, and the concrete flood increased. The next moment he was aware that he'd made some sort of mistake. The foreman was wrenching at the door of the cab and screaming blue murder. "Stop, for God's sake, stop!" he shouted. "There's a woman down that hole!" "A what?" said the driver, and switched off the engine. "A fucking woman! And look what you've been and fucking done! I told you to stop pouring, and you went on! You've been and poured 20 tons of liquid concrete on her!" The driver climbed down from his cab and went round to the chute, where the last trickles of cement were still sliding hesitantly into the hole. "A woman?" he said. "What, down that hole? What's she doing down there?" The foreman stared at him demonically. "Doing?" he bellowed. "What you think she's doing? What will you be doing if you just had 20 tons of liquid concrete dumped on you? Fucking drowning, that's what." The driver scratched his head. Well, I didn't know she was down there. How was I to know? You should have told me. Told you, shrieked the foreman. I told you to stop. You weren't listening. I thought you wanted me to pour faster. I couldn't hear what you were saying. Well, every other bugger could, yelled the foreman. Certainly Wilt in room 593 could. He stared wild-eyed out of the window as the panic spread. Beside him, Motor Mechanics 3 had lost all interest in Shane. They clustered at the window and watched. "Are you quite sure?" asked the driver. "Sure, course I'm sure," yelled the foreman. "Ask Barney." The other workman, evidently Barney, nodded. Oh, she was down there all right. I'll vouch for that. All crumpled up she was. She had one hand in the air, and her legs was... "Jesus," said the driver, visibly shaken. "What the hell are we going to do now?" It was a question that had been bothering Wilt. Call the police, presumably. The foreman confirmed his opinion. "Get the cops, get an ambulance, get the fire brigade, and get a pump, for God's sake, get a pump." "Oh, a pump's no good," said the driver. "You'll never pump that concrete out of there, not in a month of Sundays. Anyway, it wouldn't do any good. She'll be dead by now. Crushed to death, wouldn't drown with 20 tons on her." "Why didn't she say something?" "Would it have made any difference if she had?" asked the foreman hoarsely. "You'd still have gone on pouring." "Well, how did she get down there in the first place?" said the driver to change the subject. "How the fuck would I know? She must have fallen." "And pulled that plywood sheet over her, I suppose," said Barney, who clearly had a practical turn of mind. "She was bloody murdered." "We all know that," squawked the foreman. "Aye, Chris here. I told him to stop pouring. You heard me. Everyone for half a mile must have heard me, but not Chris. Oh, no, he has to go on." "Oh, she was murdered before she was put down the hole," said Barney. "That wouldn't cover it. Wouldn't have been there if she'd fallen down herself." The foreman wiped his face with a handkerchief and looked at the square of plywood. "Well, there is that to it," he muttered. "Well, no one can say we didn't take proper safety precautions." "You're right. She must have been murdered." "Oh, my God." "Sex crime, like as not," said Barney. "Raped and strangled her. That or someone's missus. You mark my words. It was all crumpled up. And that hand, oh, I'll never forget that hand, not if I live to be 100. The foreman stared at him lividly. He seemed incapable of expressing his feelings. So was Wilt. He went back to his desk and sat with his head in his hands, while the class gaped out of the window and tried to catch what was being said. Presently, sirens sounded in the distance and grew louder. A police car arrived, 4 fire engines hurtled into the car park, and an ambulance followed. As more and more uniformed men gathered round what had once been a hole in the ground, it became apparent that getting the doll down there had been a damn sight easier than getting it out. "That concrete starts setting in 20 minutes, the driver explained when a pump was suggested for the umpteenth time. An inspector of police and the fire chief stared down at the hole. "Are you sure you saw a woman's body down there?" the inspector said. "You're positive about it?" "Positive?" squeaked the foreman. "Of course I'm positive. You don't think... Oh, tell him Barney. He saw her too." Barney told the inspector even more graphically than before. She had his hair, see, and her hand was reaching up like it was asking for help, and there were these fingers. Oh, I tell you, it was horrible. It didn't look natural. "No, well, it wouldn't," said the inspector sympathetically. "And you say there was a board on top of this hole when you arrived this morning?" The foreman gesticulated silently, and Barney showed them the board. "I was standing on it at one time," he said. "It was here all right, so help me God." "The thing is, how are we going to get her out?" said the fire chief. It was a point that was put to the manager of the construction company when he finally arrived on the scene. "God alone knows," he said. "There's no easy way of getting that concrete out now. We'd have to use drills to get down 30 feet. At the end of the hour, they were no nearer a solution to the problem. As the motor mechanics dragged themselves away from this fascinating situation to go to technical drawing, Wilt collected the unread copies of Shane and walked across to the staff room in a state of shock. The only consolation he could think of was that it would take him at least 2 to 3 days to dig down and discover that what had all the appearances of being the body of a murdered woman was, in fact, an inflatable doll. Or had been once. Wilt rather doubted if it had been inflated now. There had been something horribly intractable about that liquid concrete. 8. There was something horribly intractable about the mud bank on which the cabin cruiser had grounded. To add to their troubles, the engine had gone wrong. Gaskell said it was a broken conrod. "Is that serious?" asked Sally. "It just means we'll have to be towed to a boatyard." "By what?" "By a passing cruiser, I guess," said Gaskell. Sally looked over the side at the bulrushes. "Passing?" she said. "We've been here all night and half the morning, and nothing has passed so far. And if we did, we wouldn't be able to see it for all these fucking bulrushes." "I thought bulrushes did something for you." "Oh, that was yesterday," snapped Sally. "Today they just mean we're invisible to anyone more than 50 feet away. And now you've screwed the motor. I told you not to rev it like that." "So how was I to know it had bust a conrod?" said Gaskell. "I was just trying to get us off this mud bank. You just tell me how I'm supposed to do it without revving the goddamn motor." "You could get out and push." Gaskell peered over the side. "I could get out and drown," he said. "So the boat would be lighter," said Sally. "We've all got to make sacrifices, and you said the tide would float us off." "Well, I was mistaken. That's fresh water down there, and that means the tide doesn't reach this far." "Now he tells me. First we're in Frogwater Beach." "Reach," said Gaskell. "Frogwater whatever. Then we're in Fen Broad, and now where are we, for God's sake?" "On a mud bank," said Gaskell. In the cabin, Eva bustled about. There wasn't much space for bustling, but what there was she put to good use. She made the bunks and put the bedding away in the lockers underneath, and she plumped the cushions and emptied the ashtrays. She swept the floor and polished the table, and wiped the windows and dusted the shelves, and generally made everything as neat and tidy as it was possible to make it. And all the time her thoughts got untidier and more muddled, so that by the time she was finished and every object in sight was in its right place and the whole cabin properly arranged, she was quite confused and in two minds about nearly everything. The Pringsheims were ever so sophisticated and rich and intellectual and said clever things all the time, but they were always quarrelling and getting at one another about something, and, to be honest, they were quite impractical and didn't know the first thing about hygiene. Gaskell went to the lavatory and didn't wash his hands afterwards. And goodness only knows when he'd had a shave last. And look at the way they'd walked out of that house in Rossiter Grove without clearing up after the party, and the living room all over cups and things. Eva had been quite shocked. She would never have left her house in that sort of mess. She'd said as much to Sally, but Sally had said how non-spontaneous could you get, and anyway they were only renting the house for the summer, and that it was typical of a male-oriented social system to expect a woman to enter a contractual relationship based on female domestic servitude. Eva tried to follow her, and was left feeling guilty because she couldn't, and because it was evidently infra-dig to be house-proud, and she was. And then there was what Henry had been doing with that doll. It was so unlike Henry to do anything like that, and the more she thought about it, the more unlike Henry it became. He must have been drunk, but even so, without his clothes on. And where had he found the doll? She'd asked Sally, and had been horrified to learn that Gaskell was mad about plastic and just adored playing games with Judy, and men were like that, and so the only meaningful relationships being between women, because women didn't need to prove their virility by any overt act of extra-sexual violence, did they? By which time Eva was lost in a maze of words she didn't understand, but which sounded important, and they had another session of touch therapy. And that was another thing she was in two minds about. Touch therapy. Sally had said she was still inhibited, and being inhibited was a sign of emotional and sensational immaturity. Eva battled with her mixed feelings about the matter. On the one hand, she didn't want to be emotionally and sensationally immature, and if the revulsion she felt lying naked in the arms of another woman was anything to go by, and in Eva's view the nastier a medicine tasted, the more likely it was to do you good, then she was certainly improving her psychosexual behavior pattern by leaps and bounds. On the other hand, she wasn't altogether convinced that touch therapy was quite nice. It was only by the application of considerable willpower that she overcame her objections to it, and even so there was an undertow of doubt about the propriety of being touched quite so sensationally. It was all very puzzling, and to cap it all, she was on the pill. Eva had objected very strongly and had pointed out that Henry and she had always wanted babies and she'd never had any. But Sally had insisted. "Eva, baby," she'd said, "with Gaskell one just never knows. Sometimes he goes for months and months without so much as a twitch, and then bam, he comes all over the place. He's totally undiscriminating." "But I thought you said you had this big thing between you," Eva said. "Oh, sure, in a blue moon. Scientists sublimate, and G just lives for plastic. And we wouldn't want you to go back to Henry with G's genes in your ovum, now would we?" "Certainly not," said Eva, horrified at the thought, and had taken the pill after breakfast before going through to the tiny galley to wash up. It was all so different from transcendental meditation and pottery. On deck, Sally and Gaskell were still wrangling. "What the hell are you giving brainless boobs?" Gaskell asked. "TT, body contact, tactile liberation," said Sally. "She's sensually deprived." "Oh, she's mentally deprived, too. I met some dummies in my time, but this is the dim-wittiest. Anyway, I mean, those pills she takes at breakfast." Sally smiled. "Oh, those," she said. "Yes, those. You blowing what little mind she's got or something?" said Gaskell. "We've got enough troubles without Moby Dick taking a trip." "Oral contraceptives, baby. Just the plain old pill." "Oral contraceptives? What the hell for? I wouldn't touch her with a sterilized stirring rod." "Gaskell, honey, you're so naive. For authenticity, pure authenticity. It makes my relationship with her so much more real, don't you think? Like wearing a rubber on a dildo." Gaskell gaped at her. "Jesus, you don't mean you've—" "Not yet. Long John Silver is still in his bag, but one of these days when she's a little more emancipated—" She smiled wistfully over the bulrushes. "Perhaps it doesn't matter all that much, us being stuck here. It gives us time. So much lovely time, and you can look at your ducks." "Waiters," said Gaskell. "And we're going to run up one hell of a bill at the marina if we don't get this boat back in time." "Bill?" said Sally. "You're crazy. You don't think we're paying for this hulk?" "But you hired her from the boatyard. I mean, you're not going to tell me you just took the boat," said Gaskell. "For Christ's sake, that's theft." Sally laughed. "Honestly, G, you're so moral. I mean, you're inconsistent. You steal books from the library and chemicals from the lab, but when it comes to boats, you're all up in the air." "The books are different," said Gaskell hotly. "Yes," said Sally. "Books you don't go to jail for. That's what's different. So you want to think I stole the boat. You go on thinking that." Gaskell took out a handkerchief and wiped his glasses. "Are you telling me you didn't?" he asked finally. "I borrowed it." "Borrowed it? Who from?" "Shy." "Shymaker?" "That's right. He said we could have it whenever we wanted, so we've got it." "Does he know we've got it?" Sally sighed. "Look, he's in India, isn't he, currying sperm. So what does it matter what he knows? By the time he gets back, we'll be in the land of the free." "Shit," said Gaskell wearily. "One of these days you're going to land us in it, up to the eyeballs." "Gaskell, honey, sometimes you bore me with your worrying so." "Let me tell you something. You worry me with your goddamn attitude to other people's property. Property is theft. Oh, sure. You just get the cops to see it that way when they catch up with you. The fuzz don't go a ball on stealing in this country. The fuzz weren't going much of a ball on the well-nourished body of a woman, apparently murdered and buried under 30 feet and 20 tons of rapidly setting concrete. Barney had supplied the well-nourished bit. She had big breasts, too, he explained in the 7th version of what he'd seen. And this hand reaching up. Yes, well, we know all about the hand, said Inspector Flint. We've been into all that before. But this is the first time we've mentioned breasts. Oh, it was the hand that got me, said Barney. I mean, you don't think of breasts in a situation like that. The inspector turned to the foreman. Did you notice the deceased's breasts? He inquired. But the foreman just shook his head. He was past speech. So, we've got a well-nourished woman. What age would you say? Barney scratched his chin reflectively. Not old, he said, finally. Definitely not old. In her 20s? Could have been. In her 30s? Barney shrugged. There was something he was trying to recall, something that had seemed odd at the time. But definitely not in her 40s. Oh, no, said Barney. Younger than that. He said it rather hesitantly. You're not being very specific, said Inspector Flint. I can't help it, said Barney plaintively. You see a woman down a dirty great hole with concrete sloshing down on top of her, you don't ask her age. Quite. I realise that, but if you could just think, was there anything peculiar about her? Peculiar? Well, there was his hand, see? Inspector Flint sighed. I mean anything out of the ordinary about her appearance, her hair, for instance. What colour was it? Barney got it. I knew there was something, he said triumphantly. Her hair. It was crooked. Well, it would be, wouldn't it? You don't dump a woman down a 30-foot pile shaft without mussing up her hair in the process. No, it wasn't like that. No, it was on sideways and flattened, like she'd been hit. Well, she probably had been hit. And what you say about the wooden cover being in place is true. She didn't go down there of her own volition. But you still can't give any precise indication of her age. Well, said Barney, bits of her looked young and bits didn't, that's all I know. Which bits? Asked the inspector, hoping to hell Barney wasn't going to start on that hand again. Well, her legs didn't look right for her tits, if you see what I mean. Inspector Flint didn't. They were all thin and crumpled up like. Which were? Her legs or her tits? Her legs, of course, said Barney. I told you that she had these lovely, great... We're treating this as a case of murder, Inspector Flint told the principal 10 minutes later. The principal sat behind his desk and thought despairingly about adverse publicity. They were quite convinced it couldn't have been an accident. The evidence to date certainly doesn't suggest accidental death, said the inspector. However, we'll only be absolutely certain on that point when we manage to reach the body, and I'm afraid that's going to take some time. Time, said the principal. Do you mean to say you can't get her out this morning? Inspector Flint shook his head. Out of the question, sir, he said. We are considering 2 methods of reaching the body, and they'll both take several days. One is to drill down through the concrete, and the other is to sink another shaft next to the original hole and try to get her out from the side. Good Lord, said the principal, looking at his calendar. But that means you'll be digging away out there for several days. I'm afraid it can't be helped. Whoever put her down there made a good job of it, so we'll try to be as unobtrusive as possible. Out of the window, the principal could see 4 police cars, a fire engine, and a big blue van. This is really most unfortunate, he murmured. Murder always is, said the inspector, and got to his feet. It's in the nature of the thing. In the meantime, we are sealing off the site, and we'd be grateful for your cooperation. Anything you require, said the principal with a sigh. In the staff room, the presence of so many uniformed men peering down a hole provoked mixed reactions. So did the dozen policemen scouring the building site, stopping now and then to put things carefully into envelopes. But it was the arrival of the dark blue caravan that finally clinched matters. "To Mobile Murder Headquarters," Peter Fenwick explained. "Apparently some maniac's buried a woman at the bottom of one of the piles." The new left, who had been clustered in a corner discussing the likely implications of so many paramilitary fascist pigs, heaved a sigh of unmartyred regret, but continued to express doubts. "No, seriously," said Fenwick. "I asked one of them what they were doing. I thought it was some sort of bomb scare." Dr. Cox, head of science, confirmed it. His office looked directly onto the hole. "Oh, it's too dreadful to contemplate," he murmured. "Every time I look up, I think what she must have suffered." "What do you suppose they're putting into those envelopes?" asked Dr. Mayfield. "Clothes," said Dr. Board, with evident satisfaction. "Hairs, bits of skin and bloodstains, the usual trivial detritus of violent crime." Dr. Cox hurried from the room, and Dr. Mayfield looked disgusted. "How revolting," he said. "Isn't it possible that there's been some mistake? I mean, why should anyone want to murder a woman here?" Dr. Board sipped his coffee and looked wistfully at him. "I can think of any number of reasons," he said happily. "There are at least a dozen women in my evening class whom I would cheerfully beat to death and drop down holes, Sylvia Swansbeck for one." "Oh, whoever did it must have known that they were going to pour concrete down today," said Fenwick. "Looks like an inside job to me." "One of our less community-conscious students, perhaps," suggested Dr. Board. "I don't suppose they've time to check if any of the staff are missing." "They'll probably find it has something to do with the tech," said Dr. Mayfield. "Some maniac—" "Oh, no, come. Give credit where credit is due," interrupted Dr. Board. "There was obviously an element of premeditation involved. Whoever the murderer is, he planned it pretty carefully. What puzzles me is why he didn't shovel earth down on top of the wretched woman so that she couldn't be seen. He probably intended to, but was disturbed before he could get round to it. One of those little accidents of fate." In the corner of the staff room, Wilt sat and drank his coffee, conscious that he was the only person not staring out of the window. What the hell was he to do? The sensible thing would be to go to the police and explain that he'd been trying to get rid of an inflatable doll that someone had given him. But would they believe him? If that was all that had happened, why had he dressed it up in a wig and clothes? And why had he left it inflated? Why hadn't he just thrown the thing away? He was just rehearsing the pros and cons of the argument when the head of engineering came in and announced that the police intended boring another hole next to the first one instead of digging down through the concrete. "They'll probably be able to see bits of her sticking out the side," he explained. "Apparently she had one arm up in the air, and with all that concrete coming down on top of her, there's a chance that the arm will have been pressed against the side of the hole. Much quicker that way." "I must say I can't see the need for haste," said Dr. Board. "I should have thought she'd be pretty well preserved in all that concrete. Mummified, I dare say." In his corner, Wilt rather doubted it. With 20 tons of concrete on top of her, even Judy, who had been an extremely resilient doll, was hardly likely to have withstood the pressure. She would have burst as sure as eggs were eggs. In which case all the police would find was the empty plastic arm of a doll. They'd hardly bother to dig a burst plastic doll out. "And another thing," continued the head of engineering, "if the arm's sticking out, they'll be able to take fingerprints straight away." Wilt smiled to himself. That was one thing they weren't going to find on Judy. Fingerprints. He finished his coffee more cheerfully and went off to a class of senior secretaries. He found them agog with news of the murder. "Do you think it was a sex killing?" a small blonde girl in the front row asked as Wilt handed out copies of This Island Now. He'd always found the chapter on the vicissitudes of adolescence appealed to senior sex. It dealt with sex and violence and was 12 years out of date, but then so were senior secretaries. Today there was no need for the book. "I don't think it was any sort of killing," said Wilt, taking his place behind the desk. "Oh, but it was. They saw a woman's body down there, the small blonde insisted. They thought they saw something down there that looked like a body, said Wilt. That doesn't mean it was one. People's imaginations play tricks with them. Well, the police don't think so, said a large girl whose father was something in the city. They must be certain to go to all that trouble. We had a murder on our golf course, and all they found were bits of body cut up and put in the water hazard on the 15th. They'd been there 6 months. Someone sliced a ball on the dog-leg 12th, and it went into the pond. They fished out a foot first. It was all puffy and green. A pale girl from Will Stanton fainted in the 3rd row. By the time Wilt had revived her and taken her to the sick room, the class had got on to Crippen, Haig, and Christie. Wilt returned to find him discussing acid baths. And all they found were her false teeth and gallstones. You seem to know a lot about murder, Wilt said to the large girl. Oh, Daddy plays bridge with the chief constable, she explained. He comes to dinner and tells super stories. He says they ought to bring back hanging. I'm sure he does, said Wilt grimly. It was typical of senior sects that they knew chief constables who wanted to bring back hanging. It was all mummy and daddy and horses with senior secretaries. Anyway, hanging doesn't hurt, said the large girl. Sir Frank says a good hangman can have a man out of the condemned cell and onto the trap with a noose round his neck and pull the lever in 20 seconds. Why confine the privilege to men? Asked Wilt bitterly. The class looked at him with reproachful eyes. The last woman they hanged was Ruth Ellis, said the girl in the front row. Anyway, with women it's different, said the large girl. Why? Said Wilt inadvisedly. Well, it's slower. Slower? They had to tie Mrs. Thompson to a chair, volunteered the blonde. She behaved disgracefully. I must say I find your judgments peculiar, said Wilt. A woman murdering her husband is doubtless disgraceful. The fact that she puts up a fight when they come to execute her doesn't strike me as being disgraceful at all. I find that... Oh, it's not just that, interrupted the large girl, who wasn't to be diverted. What isn't? Said Wilt. It's being slower with women. They have to make them wear waterproof pants. Wilt gaped at her in disgust. Waterproof what? He asked without thinking. Waterproof pants, said the large girl. Dear God, said Wilt. You see, when they get to the bottom of the rope, their insides drop out, continued the large girl, administering the coup de grace. Wilt stared at her wildly and stumbled from the room. What's the matter with him? Said the girl. Anyone would think I'd said something beastly. In the corridor, Wilt leant against the wall and felt sick. Those fucking girls were worse than gasfitters. At least gasfitters didn't go in for such disgusting anatomical details. And besides senior sects, all came from so-called respectable families. By the time he felt strong enough to face them again, the hour had ended. Wilt went back into the classroom sheepishly and collected the books. Name of Wilt mean anything to you? Henry Wilt? Asked the inspector. Wilt, said the vice-principal, who had been left to cope with the police while the principal spent his time more profitably, trying to offset the adverse publicity caused by the whole appalling business. Well, yes, it does. He's one of our liberal studies lecturers. Why? Is there, Oh, if you don't mind, sir, I'd just like a word with him, in private. But Wilt's a most inoffensive man, said the vice-principal. I'm sure he couldn't help you at all. Oh, probably not, but all the same. You're not suggesting for one moment that Henry Wilt has anything to do with... The vice-principal stopped and studied the expression on the inspector's face. It was ominously neutral. I'd rather not go into details, said Inspector Flint, and it's best if we don't jump to conclusions. The vice-principal picked up the phone. Do you want him to come across to that, caravan? He asked. Inspector Flint shook his head. We like it to be as inconspicuous as possible. If you could just give me the use of an empty office. Oh, there's an office next door. You can use that. Wilt was in the canteen having lunch with Peter Braintree when the vice-principal's secretary came down with a message. Can't it wait? Said Wilt. Oh, he said it was most urgent. Oh, it's probably your senior lectureship come through at last, said Braintree brightly. Wilt swallowed the rest of his Scotch egg and got up. I doubt that, he said, and went wanly out of the canteen and up the stairs. He had a horrid suspicion that promotion was the last thing the vice-principal wanted to see him about. "And now, sir," said the inspector when they were seated in the office, "my name is Flint, Inspector Flint, C.I.D., and you're Mr. Wilt, Mr. Henry Wilt?" "Yes," said Wilt. "Now, Mr. Wilt, as you may have gathered, we're investigating the suspected murder of a woman whose body is believed to have been deposited at the bottom of one of the foundation holes for the new building. I dare say you know about it." Wilt nodded. "And naturally we are interested in anything that might be of assistance. I wonder if you would mind having a look at these notes." He handed Wilt a piece of paper. It was headed, "Notes on Violence and Break-up of Family Life," and underneath were a number of subheadings. 1. Increasing use of violence in public life to attain political ends. A. Bombing. B. Hijacking. C. Kidnapping. D. Assassination. 2. Ineffectuality of police methods in combating violence. A. Negative approach. Police able only to react to crime after it has taken place. B. Use of violence by the police themselves. C. Low level of intelligence of average policemen. D. Increasing use of sophisticated methods such as diversionary tactics by criminals. 3. Influence of media. TV brings crime techniques into the home. There was more, much more. Wilt looked down the list with a sense of doom. "You recognize the handwriting?" asked the inspector. "I do," said Wilt, adopting rather prematurely the elliptical language of the witness box. "You admit that you wrote those notes?" The inspector reached out a hand and took the notes back. "Yes." "They express your opinion of police methods?" Wilt pulled himself together. "They were jottings I was making for a lecture to Sandwich Course trainee firemen," he explained. "They were simply rough ideas. They need amplifying, of course, but you don't deny you wrote them." "Of course I don't. I've just said I did, haven't I?" The inspector nodded and picked up a book. "And this is yours, too?" Wilt looked at Bleak House. "It says so, doesn't it?" Inspector Flint opened the cover. "So it does," he said, with a show of astonishment. "So it does." Wilt stared at him. There was no point in maintaining the pretense any longer. The best thing to do would be to get it over quickly. They'd found the bloody book in the basket of the bicycle, and the notes must have fallen out of his pocket on the building site. "Look, Inspector," he said, "I can explain everything. It's really quite simple. I did go into that building site." The inspector stood up. "Mr. Wilt, if you're prepared to make a statement, I think I should warn you." Wilt went down to murder headquarters and made a statement in the presence of a police stenographer. His progress to the blue caravan and his failure to come out again were noted with interest by members of the staff teaching in the science block, by students in the canteen, and by 25 fellow lecturers gaping through the windows of the staff room. 9. "God damn the thing," said Gaskell as he knelt greasily beside the engine of the cruiser. "You'd think that even in this pre-technological monarchy they'd fit a decent motor. This contraption must have been made for the Ark." "Ark, ark, the lark," said Sally, "and cut the crown head's foolery. Eva's a reginophile." "A what?" "A reginophile. Monarchist. Get it? She's the queen bee, so don't be anti-British. We don't want her to stop working as well as the motor. Maybe it isn't the Conrad." "If only I could get the head off, I could tell," said Gaskell. "And what good would that do?" "Buy you another," said Sally, and went into the cabin, where Eva was wondering what they were going to have for supper. "Tar baby is still tinkering with the motor. He thinks it's a Conrad." "Conrad?" said Eva. "Only connect, baby, only connect." "With what?" The thigh bone's connected to the knee bone. The conrod's connected to the piston, and everyone knows pistons are penis symbols, the mechanized male substitute for sex, the outboard motor syndrome. Only it happens to be inboard, like his balls never dropped. Honestly, Gaskell is so regressive. I'm sure I don't know, said Eva. Sally lay back on the bunk and lit a cigar. That's what I love about you, Eva. You don't know. Ignorance is blissful, baby. I lost mine when I was 14. Eva shook her head. Men, she said disapprovingly. He was old enough to be my grandfather, said Sally. He was my grandfather. Oh, no. How awful. Not really, said Sally, laughing. He was an artist with a beard, and the smell of paint on his smock. And there was this studio, and he wanted to paint me in the nude. Oh, I was so pure in those days. He made me lie on this couch, and he arranged my legs. He was always arranging my legs, and then standing back to look at me, and painting. And one day when I was lying there, he came over and bent my legs back and kissed me, and then he was on top of me, and his smock was up, and... Eva sat and listened, fascinated. She could visualize it all so clearly, even the smell of paint in the studio and the brushes. Sally had led such an exciting life, so full of incident, and so romantic in a dreadful sort of way. Eva tried to remember what she'd been like at 14, and not even going out with boys, and there was Sally lying on a couch with a famous artist in his studio. But he raped you, she said finally. Why didn't you tell the police? The police? Oh, no, you don't understand. I was at this terribly exclusive school. They would have sent me home. Oh, it was progressive and all that, but I shouldn't have been out being painted by this artist, and my parents would never have forgiven me. They were so strict.
That is the end of this side. The story continues on the other side of this cassette. Side 6.
Sally sighed, overcome by the rigors of her wholly fictitious childhood. And now you can see why I'm so afraid of being hurt by men. When you've been raped, you know what penile aggression means. I suppose you do, said Eva, in some doubt as to what penile aggression was. You see the world differently, too. Like G says, nothing's good and nothing's bad, it just is. I went to a lecture on Buddhism once, said Eva, and that's what Mr. Podgett said. He said, Zen's all wrong. Like you just sit round waiting, that's passive. You've got to make things happen. You just sit round waiting long enough, you're dead. Someone's trampled all over you. You've got to see things happen your way and no one else's. Well, that doesn't sound very sociable, said Eva. I mean, if we all did just what we wanted all the time, it wouldn't be very nice for other people. Other people are hell, said Sally. That's Sartre, and he should know. You do what you want is good, and no moral kickback. Like G says, rats are the paradigm. You think rats go around thinking what's good for other people? Well, no, I don't suppose they do, said Eva. Right. Rats aren't ethical. No way, they just do. They don't get screwed up thinking. Do you think rats can think? Asked Eva, now thoroughly engaged in the problems of rodent psychology. Of course they can't. Rats just are. No schadenfreude with rats. What's schadenfreude? Second cousin to Weltschmerz, said Sally, stubbing her cigar out in the ashtray. So we can all do what we want whenever we want to. That's the message. It's only people like G who've got the no bug who get balled up. No bug? They've got to know how everything works. Scientists. Lawrence was right. It's all head and no body with G. Henry's a bit like that, said Eva. He's always reading or talking about books. I've told him he doesn't know what the real world is like. In the mobile murder headquarters, Wilt was learning. He sat opposite Inspector Flint, whose face was registering increasing incredulity. "Now, we'll just go over that again," said the inspector. "You say that what those men saw down that hole was, in fact, an inflatable plastic doll with a vagina?" "The vagina is incidental," said Wilt, calling forth reserves of inconsequence. "That's as may be," said the inspector. "Most dolls don't have them, but... all right, we'll let that pass. The point I'm trying to get at is that you're quite positive there isn't a real live human being down there." "Positive," said Wilt. "And if there were, it's doubtful if it'd still be alive now." The inspector studied him unpleasantly. "I don't need you to point that out to me," he said. "If there was the faintest possibility of whatever it is down there still being alive, I wouldn't be sitting here, would I?" "No," said Wilt. "Right. So now we come to the next point. How is it that what those men saw, they say a woman and you say a doll, that this thing was wearing clothes, had hair, and even more remarkably had its head bashed in and one hand stretched up in the air?" "Well, that was the way it fell," said Wilt. "I suppose the arm got caught up on the side and lifted up." "And its head was bashed in?" "Well, I did drop a lump of mud on it," Wilt admitted. "That would account for that." "You dropped a lump of mud on its head?" "That's what I said," Wilt agreed. "I know that's what you said. What I want to know is why you felt obliged to drop a lump of mud on the head of an inflatable doll that had, as far as I can gather, never done you any harm." Wilt hesitated. That damned doll had done him a great deal of harm, one way and another, but this didn't seem an opportune moment to go into that. "I don't know, really," he said finally. "I just thought it might help." "Help what?" "Help? I don't know. I just did it, that's all. I was drunk at the time." "All right, we'll come back to that in a minute. There's still one question you haven't answered. If it was a doll, why was it wearing clothes?" Wilt looked desperately round the caravan and met the eyes of the police stenographer. There was a look in them that didn't inspire confidence. Talk about lack of suspension of disbelief. "You're not going to believe this," Wilt said. The inspector looked at him and lit a cigarette. "Well?" "As a matter of fact, I had dressed it up," Wilt said, squirming with embarrassment. "You had dressed it up?" "Yes," said Wilt. "And may one inquire what purpose you had in mind when you dressed it up?" "I don't know exactly." The inspector sighed significantly. "Right, we go back to the beginning. We have a doll with a vagina, which you dress up and bring down here in the dead of night and deposit at the bottom of a 30-foot hole and drop lumps of mud on its head. Is that what you are saying?" "Yes," said Wilt. "You wouldn't prefer to save everyone concerned a lot of time and bother by admitting here and now that what is at present resting, hopefully at peace, under 20 tons of concrete at the bottom of that pile is the body of a murdered woman?" "No," said Wilt. "I most definitely wouldn't." Inspector Flint sighed again. "You know, we're going to get to the bottom of this thing," he said. "It may take time and it may take expense, and God knows it's taking patience. But when we get down there..." "You're going to find an inflatable doll," said Wilt. "With a vagina?" "With a vagina." In the staff room, Peter Braintree staunchly defended Wilt's innocence. "I tell you, I've known Henry well for the past 7 years, and whatever's happened, he had nothing to do with it." Mr. Morris, the head of Liberal Studies, looked out of the window sceptically. "They've had him in there since 2:10. That's 4 hours," he said. They wouldn't do that unless they thought he had some connection with the dead woman. Well, they can think what they like. I know Henry, and even if the poor sod wanted to, he's incapable of murdering anyone. He did punch that printer on Tuesday. That shows he's capable of irrational violence. Wrong again. The printer punched him, said Braintree. Only after Wilt had called him a snivelling fucking moron, Mr. Morris pointed out. Anyone who goes into Printers 3 and calls one of them that needs his head examined. He killed poor old Pinkerton, you know. Gassed himself in his car. Well, I had a damn good try at killing poor old Henry, come to that. Of course, that blow might have affected his brain, said Mr. Morris with morose satisfaction. Concussion can do funny things to a man's character. Change him overnight from a nice, quiet, inoffensive little fellow like Wilt into a homicidal maniac who suddenly goes berserk. Stranger things have happened. I dare say Henry would be the first to agree with you, said Braintree. Can't be very pleasant sitting in that caravan being questioned by detectives. I wonder what they're doing to him. Oh, just asking questions, things like, how have you been getting on with your wife, and can you account for your movements on Saturday night? They start off gently and then work up to the heavy stuff later on. Peter Braintree sat in silent horror. Eva. He'd forgotten all about her. And as for Saturday night, he knew exactly what Henry had said that he'd been doing before he turned up on the doorstep covered with mud and looking like death. All I'm saying, said Mr. Morris, is that it seems very strange to me that they find a dead body at the bottom of a shaft filled with concrete, and the next thing you know, they've got Wilt in that murder HQ for questioning. Very strange indeed. I wouldn't like to be in his shoes. He got up and left the room, and Peter Braintree sat on wondering if there was anything he could do, like phone a lawyer and ask him to come round and speak to Henry. It seemed a bit premature, and presumably Henry could ask to see a lawyer himself if he wanted one. Inspector Flint lit another cigarette with an air of insouciant menace. "How well did you get on with your wife?" he asked. Wilt hesitated. "Well enough," he said. "Just well enough. No more than that." "Oh, we get along just fine," said Wilt, conscious that he'd made an error. "I see. And I suppose she can substantiate your story about this inflatable doll?" "Substantiate it?" "The fact that you made a habit of dressing it up and carrying on with it." "I didn't make a habit of anything of the sort," said Wilt indignantly. "I'm only asking. You were the one who first raised the fact that it had a vagina. I didn't. You volunteered the information, and I naturally assumed—" "What did you assume?" said Wilt. "You've got no right to." "Mr. Wilt," said the inspector, "put yourself in my position. I am investigating a case of suspected murder, and a man comes along and tells me that what 2 eyewitnesses describe as the body of a well-nourished woman in her early 30s. In her early 30s? Dolls don't have ages, and if that bloody doll was more than 6 months old— Please, Mr. Wilt, if you'll just let me continue. As I was saying, we have a prima facie case of murder, and you admit yourself to having put a doll with a vagina down a hole. Now, if you were in my shoes, what sort of inference would you draw from that?" Wilt tried to think of some totally innocent interpretation, and couldn't. Wouldn't you be the first to agree that it does look a bit peculiar? Wilt nodded. It looked horribly peculiar. "Right," continued the inspector. "Now, if we put the nicest possible interpretation on your actions, and particularly on your emphasis that this doll had a vagina—" "I didn't emphasize it. I only mentioned the damn thing to indicate that it was extremely lifelike. I wasn't suggesting I made a habit of—" He stopped and looked miserably at the floor. "Go on, Mr. Wilt. Don't stop now. It often helps to talk." Wilt stared at him frantically. Talking to Inspector Flint wasn't helping him one iota. If you're implying that my sex life was confined to copulating with an inflatable fucking doll dressed in my wife's clothes... Hold it there, said the inspector, stubbing out his cigarette significantly. Ah, so we've taken another step forward. You admit, then, that whatever is down that hole is dressed in your wife's clothes. Yes or no? Yes, said Wilt miserably. Inspector Flint stood up. I think it's about time we all went and had a little chat with Mrs. Wilt, he said. I want to hear what she has to say about your funny little habits. I'm afraid that's going to be a little difficult, said Wilt. Difficult? Well, you see, she's gone away. Gone away? Said the inspector. Did I hear you say that Mrs. Wilt has gone away? Yes. And where has Mrs. Wilt gone to? That's the trouble, I don't know. You don't know? No, I honestly don't know, said Wilt. She didn't tell you where she was going? No, she just wasn't there when I got home. She didn't leave a note or anything like that? Yes, said Wilt. As a matter of fact, she did. Right, well, let's just go up to your house and have a look at that note. I'm afraid that's not possible, said Wilt. I got rid of it. You got rid of it? Said the inspector. You got rid of it? How? Wilt looked pathetically across at the police stenographer. To tell the truth, I wiped my bottom with it, he said. Inspector Flint gazed at him demonically. You did what? Well, there was no toilet paper in the lavatory, so I... He stopped. Inspector was lighting yet another cigarette. His hands were shaking, and he had a distant look in his eyes that suggested that he had just peered over some appalling abyss. Mr. Wilt, he said, when he had managed to compose himself, I trust that I'm a reasonably tolerant man, a patient man, and a humane man. But if you seriously expect me to believe one word of your utterly preposterous story, you must be insane. First, you tell me that you put a doll down that hole. Then you admit that it was dressed in your wife's clothes. Now you say she went away without telling you where she was going. And finally, to cap it all, you have the temerity to sit there and tell me that you wiped your ass with the one piece of solid evidence that could substantiate your statement. But I did, said Wilt. Balls! Shouted the inspector. You and I both know where Mrs. Wilt has gone, and there's no use pretending we don't. She's down at the bottom of that fucking hole, and you put her there. Are you arresting me? Wilt asked as they walked in a tight group across the road to the police car. No, said Inspector Flint. You're just helping the police with their inquiries. It will be on the news tonight. My dear Braintree, of course we'll do all we can, said the vice-principal. Wilt has always been a loyal member of staff, and there's obviously been some dreadful mistake. I'm sure you needn't worry. The whole thing will right itself before long. I hope you're right, said Braintree. But there are complicating factors. For one thing, there's Eva. Oh, Eva, Mrs. Wilt? You're not suggesting... No, I'm not suggesting anything. All I'm saying is that, well, she's missing from home. She walked out on Henry last Friday. Mrs. Wilt, what? Oh. Well, I hardly knew her except by reputation, of course. Wasn't she the woman who broke Mr. Lockyer's collarbone during a part-time evening class in judo some years back? That was Eve, said Braintree. Well, she hardly sounds the sort of woman who would allow Wilt to put her down... She isn't, said Braintree hastily. If anyone was liable to be murdered in the Wilt household, it was Henry. I think the police should be informed of that. They were interrupted by the principal, who came in with a copy of the evening paper. You've seen this, I suppose, he said, waving it distraughtly. It's absolutely appalling. He put the paper down on the desk and indicated the headlines. Murdered woman buried in concrete at Tech. Lecturer helping police. Oh, dear, said the vice-principal. Oh, dear. How very unfortunate. Couldn't have come at a worse moment. "Oh, it shouldn't have come at all," snapped the principal. "And that's not all. I've already had half a dozen phone calls from parents wanting to know if we make a habit of employing murderers on the full-time staff. Who is this fellow Wilt, anyway?" "He's in liberal studies," said the vice-principal. "He's been with us 10 years. Oh, liberal studies. I might have guessed it. If they're not poets, monkey, they're Maoists, or... Oh, I don't know where the hell Morris gets them from. Now we've got a blasted murderer. God knows what I'm going to tell the Education Committee tonight. They've called an emergency meeting for 8. "Well, I must say that I resent Wilt being called a murderer," said Braintree loyally. "There's nothing to suggest that he's murdered anyone." The principal studied him for a moment and then looked back at the headlines. "Mr. Braintree, when someone is helping the police with their inquiries into a murder, it may not be proven that he is a murderer, but the suggestion is there." "Well, it's certainly not going to help us get the new CNAA degree off the ground," intervened the vice-principal tactfully. "We've got a visit from the inspection committee scheduled on Friday." "From what the police tell me, it isn't going to help to get the new administration block off the ground either," said the principal. "They say it's going to take at least 3 days to bore down to the bottom of the pile, and then they'll have to drill through the concrete to get the body out. That means they'll have to put a new pile down, and we're already well behind schedule, and our building budget has been halved. Oh, why on earth couldn't he have chosen somewhere else to dispose of his damned wife?" "I don't think," Braintree began. "I don't care what you think," said the principal. "I'm merely telling you what the police think." Braintree left them still wrangling and trying to figure out ways and means of counteracting the adverse publicity the case had already brought the Tech. He went down to the Liberal Studies office and found Mr. Morris in a state of despair. He was trying to arrange stand-in lecturers for all Wilt's classes. "But he'll probably be back in the morning," Braintree said. "Oh, like hell he will," said Morris. "When they take 'em in like that, they keep them, mark my words. The police may make mistakes, I'm not saying they don't. But when they act this swiftly, they're onto a sure thing. Mind you, I always thought Wilt was a bit odd." "Odd? I just come from the VP's office." "You want to hear what the principal's got to say about liberal studies staff?" "Oh, Christ," said Morris. "Don't tell me." "Anyway, what's so odd about Henry?" "Too meek and mild for my liking. Look at the way he's accepted remaining a lecturer grade 2 all these years." "That was hardly his fault." "Of course it was his fault. All he had to do was to threaten to resign and go somewhere else, and he'd have got promotion like a shot. It's the only way to get it in this place. Make your presence felt." "He seems to have done that now," said Braintree. "The principal is already blaming him for throwing the building program off schedule, and if we don't get the joint honours degree past the CNAA, Henry is going to be made the scapegoat. It's too bad. Eva should have had more sense than to walk out on him like that." Mr. Morris took a more sombre view. "She'd have shown a damn sight more sense if she'd walked out on him before the sod took it into his head to beat her to death and dump her down that bloody shaft. Now, who the hell can I get to take Gasfitters 1 tomorrow?" 10. At 34 Parkview Avenue, Wilt sat in the kitchen with Clem while the detectives ransacked the house. "You're not going to find anything incriminating here," he told Inspector Flint. "Oh, never you mind what we're going to find. We're just having a look." He sent one detective upstairs to examine Mrs. Wilt's clothes, or what remained of them. "If she went away, she'd have taken half her wardrobe," he said. "I know women. On the other hand, if she's pushing up 20 tons of premix, she won't need more than what she's got on." Eva's wardrobe was found to be very well stocked. Even Wilt had to admit that she hadn't taken much with her. "What was she wearing when you last saw her?" the inspector asked. "Lemon loungers," said Wilt. "Lemon what?" "Pyjamas," said Wilt, adding to the list of incriminating evidence against him. The inspector made a note of the fact in his pocketbook. "In bed, was she?" "No," said Wilt. "Round at the Pringsheims." "Pringsheims? And who might they be?" The Americans I told you about who live in Rossiter Grove. They haven't mentioned any Americans to me, said the inspector. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I had. I'm getting muddled. She went away with them. Oh, did she? And I suppose we'll find they're missing, too. Almost certainly, said Wilt. I mean, if she was going away with them, they must have gone too, and if she isn't with them, I can't imagine where she's got to. I can, said the inspector, looking with distasteful interest at a stain on a sheet one of the detectives had found in the dirty linen basket. By the time they left the house, the incriminating evidence consisted of the sheet, an old dressing-gown cord that had found its way mysteriously into the attic, a chopper that Wilt had once used to open a tin of red lead, and a hypodermic syringe which Eva had got from the vet for watering cacti very precisely during her indoor plant phase. There was also a bottle of tablets with no label on it. How the hell should I know what they are? Wilt asked when confronted with the bottle. Probably aspirins. Anyway, it's full. Put it with the other exhibits, said the inspector. Wilt looked at the box. For God's sake, what do you think I did with her? Poisoned her, strangled her, hacked her to bits with a chopper and injected her with biofood? What's biofood? Asked Inspector Flint with sudden interest. It's stuff you feed plants with, said Wilt. The bottle's on the windowsill. The inspector added the bottle of biofood to the box. We know what you did with her, Mr. Wilt, he said. It's how that interests us now. They went out to the police car and drove round to the Pringsheim's house in Rossiter Grove. You just sit in the car with the constable here while I go and see if they're in, said Inspector Flint, and went to the front door. Wilt sat and watched while he rang the bell. He rang again, he hammered on the door knocker, and finally walked round through the gate-marked tradesman's entrance to the kitchen door. A minute later, he was back and fumbling with the car radio. You've hit the nail on the head, all right, Wilt, he snapped. They've gone away. The place is a bloody shambles. Looks like they've had an orgy. Take him out. The two detectives bundled Wilt, no longer Mr. Wilt, but plain Wilt, and conscious of the fact, out of the car, while Inspector called Fenland Constabulary and spoke with sinister urgency about warrants and sending something that sounded like the D Brigade up. Wilt stood in the driveway of 12 Rossiter Grove and wondered what the hell was happening to him. The order of things on which he'd come to depend was disintegrating round him. We're going in the back way, said the inspector. This doesn't look good. They went down the path to the kitchen door and round to the back garden. Wilt could see what the inspector had meant by a shambles. The garden didn't look at all good. Paper plates lay about the lawn, or, blown by the wind, had wheeled across the garden into honeysuckle or climbing rose, while paper cups, some squashed and some still filled with Pringsheim punch and rainwater, littered the ground. But it was the beef burgers that gave the place its air of macabre filth. They were all over the lawn, stained with coleslaw, so that Wilt was put in mind of Clem. The dog returns to his vomit, said Inspector Flint, evidently reading his mind. They crossed the terrace to the lounge windows and peered through. If the garden was bad, the interior was awful. Smash a pane in the kitchen window and let us in, said the inspector to the taller of the two detectives. A moment later, the lounge window slid back and they went inside. No need for forcible entry, said the detective. The back door was unlocked and so was this window. I must have cleared out in a hell of a hurry. The inspector looked round the room and wrinkled his nose. The smell of stale pot, sour punch, and candle smoke still hung heavily in the house. If they went away, he said ominously, and glanced at Wilt. They must have gone away, said Wilt, who felt called upon to make some comment on the scene. No one would live in all this mess for a whole weekend without... Live? You did say live, didn't you? Said Flint, stepping on a piece of burnt beef burger. What I meant. Never mind what you meant, Wilt. Let's see what happened here. They went into the kitchen, where the same chaos reigned, and then into another room. Everywhere it was the same. Dead cigarette ends doused in cups of coffee or ground out on the carpet. Pieces of broken record behind the sofa marked the end of Beethoven's Fifth. Cushions lay crumpled at the wall. Burnt-out candles hung limply post-coital from bottles. To add a final touch to the squalor, someone had drawn a portrait of Princess Anne on the wall with a red felt-tipped pen. She was surrounded by helmeted policemen, and underneath was written, "The fuzz around our Annie, the royal family's Fanny. The prick is dead, long live the cunt." Sentiments which were doubtless perfectly acceptable in women's lib circles, but were hardly calculated to establish the Pringsheims very highly in Inspector Flint's regard. "You've got some nice friends, Wilt," he said. "No friends of mine," said Wilt with feeling. "The sods can't even spell." They went upstairs and looked in the big bedroom. The bed was unmade. Clothes, mostly underclothes, were all over the floor or hung out of drawers, and an unstoppered bottle of Joy lay on its side on the dressing table. The room stank of perfume. "Jesus wept," said the inspector, eyeing a pair of jock straps belligerently. "All that's missing is some blood." They found it in the bathroom. Dr. Shymaker's cut hand had rained bloodstains in the bath and spattered the tiles with dark blotches. The bathroom door with its broken frame was hanging from the bottom hinge, and there were spots of blood on the paintwork. "I knew it," said the inspector, studying their message, and that written in lipstick on the mirror above the wash basin. Wilt looked at it too. It seemed unduly personal. "Where Wilt fagged and Eva ran, who was then the male chauvinist pig?" "Charming," said Inspector Flint. He turned to look at Wilt, whose face was now the colour of the tiles. "I don't suppose you'd know anything about that. Not your handiwork." "Certainly not," said Wilt. "Nor this," said the inspector, pointing to the bloodstains in the bath. Wilt shook his head. "And I suppose this has nothing to do with you either." He indicated a diaphragm that had been nailed to the wall above the lavatory seat. "Where the bee sucks, there suck I, underneath a Dutch cap, nice and dry." Wilt stared at the thing in utter disgust. "I don't know what to say," he muttered. "It's all so awful." "You can say that again," the inspector agreed, and turned to more practical matters. "Well, she didn't die in here." "How can you tell?" asked the younger of the two detectives. "Not enough blood." The inspector looked round uncertainly. "On the other hand, one hard bash—" They followed the bloodstains down the passage to the room where Wilt had been doll-knotted. "For God's sake, don't touch anything," said the inspector, easing the door open with his sleeve. "The fingerprint boys are going to have a field day here." He looked inside at the toys. "I suppose you butchered the children, too," he said grimly. "Children?" said Wilt. "I didn't know they had any." "Well, if you didn't," said the inspector, who was a family man, "the poor little buggers have got something to be thankful for. Not much by the looks of things, but something." Wilt poked his head round the door and looked at the teddy bear and the rocking horse. "Well, those are Gaskell's," he said. "He likes to play with them. I thought you said you didn't know they had any children." "They haven't. Gaskell is Dr. Pringsheim. He's a biochemist and a case of arrested development, according to his wife." The inspector studied him thoughtfully. The question of arrest had become one that needed careful consideration. "I don't suppose you're prepared to make a full confession now?" he asked, without much hope. "No, I'm not," said Wilt. "I didn't think you would be, Wilt," said the inspector. "All right, take him down to the station. I'll be along later." The detectives took Wilt by the arms. It was the last straw. "Leave me alone," he yelled. "You've got no right to do this. You've got—" "Wilt!" shouted the inspector. "I'm going to give you one last chance. If you don't go quietly, I'm going to charge you here and now with the murder of your wife." Wilt went quietly. There was nothing else to do. "The screw," said Sally, But you said it was the Conrad. So I was wrong, said Gaskell. She cranks over. It, G, it. It cranks over. Okay, it cranks over, so it can't be a Conrad. It could be that something got tangled with a prop shaft. Like what? Like weeds. Why don't you go down and have a look yourself? With these glasses, said Gaskell, I wouldn't be able to see a thing. Well, you know I can't swim, said Sally. I have this leg. Well, I can swim, said Eva. Now, we'll tie a rope round you. That way you won't drown, said Gaskell. All you got to do is go under and feel if there's anything down there. We know what's down there, said Sally. Mud is. Round the prop shaft, said Gaskell. Then, if there is, you can take it off. Eva went into the cabin and put on the bikini. Honestly, Gaskell, sometimes I think you're doing this on purpose. First it's the Conrad, and now it's the screw. Well, we got to try everything. We can't just sit here, said Gaskell. I'm supposed to be back in the lab tomorrow. Well, you should have thought of that before, said Sally. Now all we need is a goddamn albatross. If you ask me, we've got one, said Gaskell as Eva came out of the cabin and put on a bathing cap. Now, where's the rope? She asked. Gaskell looked in a locker and found some. He tied it round her waist, and Eva clambered over the side into the water. Oh, it's ever so cold, she giggled. That's because of the Gulf Stream, said Gaskell. It doesn't come this far round. Eva swam out and put her feet down. It's terribly shallow and full of mud. She waded round, hanging onto the rope, and groped under the stern of the cruiser. I can't feel anything, she called. It'll be further under, said Gaskell, peering down at her. Eva put her head under the water and felt the rudder. That's the rudder, said Gaskell. Of course it is, said Eva. I know that, silly. I'm not stupid. She disappeared under the boat. This time she found the propeller, but there was nothing wrapped round it. It's just muddy, that's all, she said when she resurfaced. There's mud all along the bottom. Well, there would be, wouldn't there, said Gaskell. Eva waded round to the side. We just happened to be stuck on a mud bank. Eva went down again, but the prop shaft was clear too. I told you so, said Sally as they hauled Eva back on board. You just made her do it so you could see her in her plastic bikini all covered with mud. Come, Botticelli, baby, let Sally wash you off. Oh, Jesus, said Gaskell. Penis arising from the waves. He went back to the engine and looked at it uncertainly. Perhaps there was a blockage in the fuel line. It didn't seem very likely, but he had to try something. They couldn't stay stuck on the mud bank forever. On the foredeck, Sally was sponging Eva down. Now, the bottom half, darling, she said, untying the string. Oh, Sally, no, Sally. Labia, babia. Oh, Sally, you are awful. Gaskell struggled with the adjustable wrench. All this touch therapy was getting to him. And the plastic. At the county hall, the principal was doing his best to pacify the members of the education committee, who were demanding a full inquiry into the recruitment policy of the liberal studies department. Let me explain, he said patiently, looking round at the committee, which was a nice balance of business interests and social commitment. The 1944 Education Act laid down that all apprentices should be released from their places of employment to attend day-release classes at technical colleges. Now, we know all that, said a building contractor, and we know it's all a bloody waste of time and public money. This country'd be a sight better off if they were left to get on with their jobs. The courses they attend, continued the principal before anyone with a social conscience could intervene, are craft-orientated with the exception of 1 hour, one obligatory hour of liberal studies. Now, the difficulty with liberal studies is that no one knows what it means. Liberal studies means, says Mrs. Chataway, who prided herself on being an advocate of progressive education, in which role she had made a substantial contribution to the illiteracy rate in several previously good primary schools, providing socially deprived adolescents with a firm grounding in liberal attitudes and culturally extending topics. It means teaching them to read and write, said a company director. It's no good having workers who can't read instructions. It means whatever anyone chooses it to mean, said the principal hastily. Now, if you're faced with the problem of having to find lecturers who are prepared to spend their lives going into classrooms filled with gas fitters or plasterers or printers who see no good reason for being there, and keeping them occupied with a subject that does not, strictly speaking, exist, you cannot afford to pick and choose the sort of staff you employ. That is the crux of the problem. The committee looked at him doubtfully. Am I to understand that you're suggesting that liberal studies teachers are not devoted and truly creative individuals, imbued with a strong sense of vocation? Asked Mrs. Chataway belligerently. No, said the principal, I'm not saying that at all. I'm merely trying to make the point that liberal studies lecturers are not as other men are. They either start out odd or they end up odd. It's in the nature of their occupation. But they're all highly qualified, said Mrs. Chataway. They all have degrees. Quite. As you say, they all hold degrees. They're all qualified teachers, but the stresses to which they're subject leave their mark. Let me put it this way. If you were to take a heart transplant surgeon and ask him to spend his life docking dogs' tails, you'd hardly expect him to emerge unscathed after 10 years' work. The analogy is exact, believe me. Exact. Well, all I can say, protested the building contractor, is that not all liberal studies lecturers end up burying their murdered wives at the bottom of pile shafts. And all I can say, said the principal, is that I'm extremely surprised more don't. The meeting broke up, undecided.
That is the end of this side. The story continues on the next cassette. Side 7.
11. As dawn broke glaucously over East Anglia, Wilt sat in the interview room at the Central Police Station, isolated from the natural world and in a wholly artificial environment that included a table, 4 chairs, a detective sergeant, and a fluorescent light on the ceiling that buzzed slightly. There were no windows, just pale green walls, and a door through which people came and went occasionally, and Wilt went twice to relieve himself in the company of a constable. Inspector Flint had gone to bed at midnight, and his place had been taken by Detective Sergeant Yates, who had started again at the beginning. What beginning? Said Wilt. At the very beginning. God made heaven and earth and all. Forget the wisecracks, said Sergeant Yates. Now that, said Wilt appreciatively, is a more orthodox use of wise. What is? Wisecrack. It's slang, but it's good slang. Wise, if you get my meaning. Detective Sergeant Yates studied him closely. This is a soundproof room, he said finally. So I've noticed, said Wilt. A man could scream his guts out in here and no one outside would be any the wiser. Wiser, said Wilt doubtfully. Wisdom and knowledge are not the same thing. Someone outside might not be aware that... Shut up, said Sergeant Yates. Wilt sighed. If you would just let me get some sleep. You'll get some sleep when you tell us why you murdered your wife, where you murdered her, and how you murdered her. I don't suppose it'll do you any good if I tell you I didn't murder her. Sergeant Yates shook his head. No, he said. We know you did. You know you did. We know where she is. We're going to get her out. We know you put her there. You've at least admitted that much. I keep telling you I put an inflatable. Was Mrs. Wilt inflatable? Was she? Fuck, said Wilt. Right, so we'll forget the inflatable doll crap. I wish to God I could, said Wilt. I'll be only too glad when you get down there and dig it out. It'll have burst, of course, with all that concrete on it, but you'll still recognize an inflatable plastic doll. Sergeant Yates leant across the table. Let me tell you something. When we do get Mrs. Wilt out of there, don't imagine she'll be unrecognizable. He stopped and stared intently at Wilt. Not unless you've disfigured her. Disfigured her? Said Wilt with a hollow laugh. She didn't need disfiguring the last time I saw her. She was looking bloody awful. She had on these lemon pajamas and her face was all covered with... He hesitated. There was a curious expression on the sergeant's face. Blood? He suggested. Were you going to say blood? No, said Wilt. I most certainly wasn't. I was going to say powder. White powder and scarlet lipstick. I told her she looked fucking awful. You must have had a very happy relationship with her, said the sergeant. I don't make a habit of telling my wife she looks fucking awful. You probably don't have a fucking awful-looking wife, said Wilt, making an attempt to conciliate the man. What I have or don't have by way of a wife is my business. She lies outside the domain of this discussion. Lucky old her, said Wilt. I wish to God mine did. By 2 o'clock they had left Mrs. Wilt's appearance and got on to the teeth and the question of identifying dead bodies by dental chart. Look, said Wilt wearily, I dare say teeth fascinate you, but at this time of night I can do without them. Well, you wear dentures or something? No, I don't, said Wilt, rejecting the plural. Did Mrs. Wilt? No, said Wilt. She was always very... I thank you, said Sergeant Yates. I knew it would come out in the end. What would? Said Wilt, his mind still on teeth. That was. The past tense. That's the giveaway. Right, so you admit she's dead. Let's go on from there. I didn't say anything of the sort. You said, did she wear dentures? And I said she didn't. You said she was. It's that was that interests me. If you'd said is, it would have been different. It might have sounded different, said Wilt, rallying his defences, but it wouldn't have made the slightest difference to the facts. Which are that my wife is probably still around somewhere, alive and kicking. You don't half give yourself away, Wilt, said the sergeant. No, it's probably. And as for kicking, I just hope, for your sake, we don't find she was still alive when they poured that concrete down on top of her. The court wouldn't take kindly to that. I doubt if anyone would, said Wilt. Now, when I said probably, what I meant was that if you had been held in custody for a day and half the night being questioned on the trot by detectives, you'd begin to wonder what had happened to your wife. It might even cross your mind that all evidence to the contrary, she might not be alive. You want to try sitting on this side of the table before you start criticizing me for using terms like probable. Anything more improbable than being accused of murdering your wife when you know for a fact that you haven't, you can't imagine. Listen, Wilt, said the sergeant. I'm not criticizing you for your language. Believe me, I'm not. I'm merely trying as patiently as I can to establish the facts. The facts are these, said Wilt. Like a complete idiot, I made the mistake of dumping an inflatable doll down the bottom of a pile shaft and someone poured concrete in and my wife is away from home and... I'll tell you one thing, Sergeant Yates told Inspector Flint when he came on duty at 7 in the morning. This one's a hard nut to crack. If you hadn't told me he hadn't a record, I could have sworn he was an old hand and a good one at that. You sure Central Records haven't got anything on him? Inspector Flint shook his head. He hasn't started squealing for a lawyer yet. Not a whimper. I tell you, he's either as nutty as a fruitcake, or he's been through this lot before. And Wilt had. Day after day, year in, year out. With gas fitters 1 and printers 3, with day-release motor mechanics and meat 2. For 10 years he'd sat in front of classes, answering irrelevant questions, discussing why Piggy's rational approach to life was preferable to Jack's brutishness, why Pangloss's optimism was so unsatisfactory, why Orwell hadn't wanted to shoot that blasted elephant or hang that man, and all the time fending off verbal attempts to rattle him and reduce him to the state of poor old Pinkerton when he gassed himself. By comparison with Bricklayers 4, Sergeant Yates and Inspector Flint were child's play. If only they would let him get some sleep, he could go on running inconsequential rings round them. "I thought I had him once," the sergeant told Flint as they conferred in the corridor. "I'd got him onto teeth." "Teeth?" said the inspector. "I was just explaining we could always identify bodies from their dental charts, and he almost admitted she was dead. And he got away again." "Teeth, eh? That's interesting. I'll have to pursue that line of questioning. Maybe his weak link." "Good luck on you," said the sergeant. "I'm off to bed." "Teeth," said Wilt. "We're not going through that again, are we? I thought we'd exhausted that topic. The last bloke wanted to know if Eva had them in the past tense. I told him she did, and—" "Wilt," said Inspector Flint, "I'm not interested in whether or not Mrs. Wilt had teeth. I presume she must have done. What I want to know is if she still has them, present tense." "Well, I imagine she must have," said Wilt patiently. "You better ask her when you find her." "And when we find her, will she be in a position to tell us?" "How the hell should I know? All I can say is, if for some quite inexplicable reason she's lost all her teeth, there'll be devil to pay. I'll never hear the end of it. She's got a mania for cleaning the things and sticking bits of dental floss down the loo. I've got no idea the number of times I've thought I'd got worms." Inspector Flint sighed. Whatever success Sergeant Yates had had with teeth, it was certainly eluding him. He switched to other matters. "Let's go over what happened at the Pringsheim's party again," he said. "Oh, let's not," said Wilt, who had so far managed to avoid mentioning his contretemps with the doll in the bathroom. "I've told you 5 times already, and it's wearing a bit thin. Besides, it was a filthy party. A lot of trendy intellectuals boosting their paltry egos." "What do you say you were an introverted sort of man, Wilt? A solitary type of person?" Wilt considered the question seriously. It was certainly more to the point than teeth. "I wouldn't go that far," he said finally. "I'm fairly quiet, but I'm gregarious too. We have to be to cope with the classes I teach." "But you don't like parties?" "I don't like parties like the Pringsheims, no. Their sexual behaviour outrages you, fills you with disgust." "Their sexual behaviour? I don't know why you pick on that." "Everything about them disgusts me. All that crap about women's lib, for one thing, when all it means to someone like Mrs. Pringsheim is that she can go round behaving like a bitch on heat, while her husband spends the day slaving over a hot test tube and comes home to cook supper, wash up, and if he's lucky, he's got enough energy to wank himself off before going to sleep. Now, if we're talking about real women's lib, that's another matter. I've got nothing. Let's just hold it there," said the inspector. "Now, 2 things you said interest me. 1, wives behaving like bitches on heat. 2, this business of you wanking yourself off." "Me?" said Wilt indignantly. "I wasn't talking about myself." "Weren't you?" "No, I wasn't." "So you don't masturbate?" "Now, look here, Inspector, you're prying into areas of my private life which don't concern you. If you want to know about masturbation, read the Kinsey report. Don't ask me." Inspector Flint restrained himself with difficulty. He tried another tack. "So when Mrs. Pringsheim lay on the bed and asked you to have intercourse with her—" "Fuck is what she said," Wilt corrected him. "You said no?" "Precisely," said Wilt. "Isn't that a bit odd?" "What, her lying there or me saying no?" "You saying no." Wilt looked at him incredulously. "Odd?" he said. "Odd, a woman comes in here and throws herself flat on her back on this table, pulls up her skirt and says, 'Fuck me, honey, prick me to the quick.' Are you going to leap on her with a whoopee, let's roll, baby? Is that what you mean by not odd?" "Jesus wept, Wilt," snarled the inspector. "You're walking a fucking tightrope with my patience." "You could have fooled me," said Wilt. "All I know is that your notion of what is odd behaviour and what isn't doesn't begin to make sense to me." Inspector Flint got up and left the room. "I'll murder the bastard, so God help me, I'll murder him," he shouted at the duty sergeant. Behind him in the interview room, Wilt put his head on the table and fell asleep. At the Tech, Wilt's absence was making itself felt in more ways than one. Mr. Morris had to take gas fitters 1 at 9 o'clock and had come out an hour later feeling that he'd gained fresh insight into Wilt's sudden excursion into homicide. The vice principal was fighting off waves of crime reporters, anxious to find out more about the man who was helping the police with their inquiries into a particularly macabre and newsworthy crime. And the principal had begun to regret his criticisms of liberal studies to the Education Committee. Mrs. Chataway had phoned to say that she'd found his remarks in the worst of taste and had hinted that she might well ask for an inquiry into the running of the Liberal Studies Department. But it was at the meeting of the course board that there was most alarm. The visitation of the Council for National Academic Awards takes place on Friday, Dr. Mayfield, head of sociology, told the committee. They are hardly likely to approve the joint honours degree in the present circumstances. And if they had any sense, they wouldn't approve it in any circumstances, said Dr. Board. Urban studies and medieval poetry, indeed. I know academic eclecticism is the vogue these days, but Helen Waddell and Lewis Mumford aren't exactly remotely natural bedfellows. Besides, the degree lacks academic content. Dr. Mayfield bristled. Academic content was his strong point. I don't see how you can say that, he said. The course has been structured to meet the needs of students looking for a thematic approach. The poor benighted creatures we managed to lure away from universities to take this course won't know a thematic approach if they saw one, said Dr. Board. Come to think of it, I wouldn't either. We all have our limitations, said Dr. Mayfield suavely. Precisely, said Dr. Board, and in the circumstances we should recognise them instead of concocting joint honours degrees which don't make sense for students who, if their A-level results are anything to go by, haven't any in the first place. Heaven knows I'm all for educational opportunity, but... The point is, interjected Dr. Cox, head of science, that it's not the degree course as such that's the purpose of the visitation. As I understand it, they've given their approval to the degree in principle. They're coming to look at the facilities the college provides, and they're hardly likely to be impressed by the presence of so many murder squad detectives. That blue caravan is most off-putting. In any case, with the late Mrs. Wilt structured into the foundations, began Dr. Board, I'm doing my best to get the police to remove her from... the syllabus? Asked Dr. Board. The premises, said Dr. Mayfield. Unfortunately, they seem to have hit a snag. A snag? They've hit bedrock at 11 feet. Dr. Board smiled. One wonders why there was any need for 30-foot piles in the first instance, if there's bedrock at 11. I can only tell you what the police have told me, said Dr. Mayfield. However, they have promised to do all they can to be off the site by Friday. Now, I'd just like to run over the arrangements again with you. The visitation will start at 11 with an inspection of the library. We'll then break up into groups to discuss faculty libraries and teaching facilities, with particular reference to our ability to provide individual tuition. I shouldn't have thought that was a point that needed emphasizing, said Dr. Board. With the few students we're likely to get, we're almost certain to have the highest teacher-to-student ratio in the country. If we adopt that approach, the committee will gain the impression that we're not committed to the degree. We must provide a united front, said Dr. Mayfield. We cannot afford at this stage to have divisions among ourselves. This degree could mean our getting polytechnic status. There were divisions, too, among the men boring down on the building site. The foreman was still at home under sedation, suffering nervous exhaustion brought on by his part in the cementation of a murdered woman, and it was left to Barney to superintend operations. There was this and, see, he told the sergeant in charge. On which side? On the right, said Barney. And we'll go down on the left. That way, if the hand's sticking out, we won't cut it off. They went down on the left and cut off the main electricity cable to the canteen. Forget that bleeding hand, said the sergeant. We go down on the right and trust to luck, just so long as we don't cut the bitch in half. They went down on the right and hit bedrock at 11 feet. This is going to slow us up no end, said Barney. Who would have thought there'd be rock down there? I would have thought some nut would incorporate his missus in the foundation of a college of further education where he worked, said the sergeant. Gruesome, said Barney. In the meantime, the staff had as usual divided into factions. Peter Braintree led those who thought Wilt was innocent, and was joined by the New Left on the ground that anyone in conflict with the Fuzz must be in the right. Major Millfield reacted accordingly and led the right against Wilt on the automatic assumption that anyone who incurred the support of the left must be in the wrong, and that anyway the police knew what they were doing. The issue was raised at the meeting of the Union called to discuss the annual pay demand. Major Millfield proposed a motion calling on the Union to support the campaign for the reintroduction of capital punishment. Bill Trent countered with a motion expressing solidarity with Brother Wilt. Peter Braintree proposed that a fund be set up to help Wilt with his legal fees. Dr. Lomax, head of commerce, argued against this and pointed out that Wilt had, by dismembering his wife, brought the profession into disrepute. Braintree said Wilt hadn't dismembered anyone, and that even the police hadn't suggested he had, and there was such a thing as a law against slander. Dr. Lomax withdrew his remark. Major Millfield insisted that there were good grounds for thinking Wilt had murdered his wife, and that anyway habeas corpus didn't exist in Russia. Bill Trent said that capital punishment didn't either. Major Millfield said, bosh. In the end, after a prolonged argument, Major Millfield's motion on hanging was passed by a block vote of the catering department, while Braintree's proposal and the motion of the New Left were defeated, and the meeting went on to discuss a pay increase of 45% to keep teachers in technical institutes in line with comparably qualified professions. Afterwards, Peter Braintree went down to the police station to see if there was anything Henry wanted. "I wonder if I might see him?" he asked the sergeant at the desk. "I'm afraid not, sir," said the sergeant. "Mr. Wilt is still helping us with our inquiries." "But isn't there anything I can get him? Doesn't he need anything?" "Mr. Wilt is well provided for," said the sergeant, with the private reservation that what Wilt needed was his head read. "Well, why shouldn't he have a solicitor?" "When Mr. Wilt asks for a solicitor, he'll be allowed to see one," said the sergeant. "I can assure you that so far he hasn't asked." And Wilt hadn't. Having finally been allowed 3 hours' sleep, he emerged from his cell at 12 o'clock and had eaten a hearty breakfast in the police canteen. He returned to the interview room, haggard and unshaven, and with his sense of the improbable markedly increased. "Now then, Henry," said Inspector Flint, dropping an official octave nomenclature-wise in the hope that Wilt would respond. "About this blood." "What blood?" said Wilt, looking round the aseptic room. "The blood on the walls of the bathroom in the Pringsheim's house. The blood on the landing. Have you any idea how it got there? Any idea at all?" "None," said Wilt. "I can only assume that someone was bleeding." "Right," said the inspector. "Who?" "Search me," said Wilt. "Quite. And you know what we've found?" Wilt shook his head. "No idea. None." "Blood spots on a pair of grey trousers in your wardrobe," said the inspector. "Blood spots, Henry. Blood spots." "Hardly surprising," said Wilt. "I mean, if you looked hard enough, you'd be bound to find some blood spots in anyone's wardrobe. The thing is, I wasn't wearing grey trousers at that party. I was wearing blue jeans." "You were wearing blue jeans? You're quite sure about that?" "Yes." "So the blood spots on the bathroom wall and the blood spots on your grey trousers have nothing to do with one another?" "Inspector," said Wilt, "far be it from me to teach you your own business, but you have a technical branch that specializes in matching bloodstains. Now, may I suggest that you make use of their skills to establish—" "Wilt, when I need your advice on how to conduct a murder investigation, I'll not only ask for it, but I will resign from the force." "Well," said Wilt. "Well, what? Do they match? Do the bloodstains match?" The inspector studied him grimly. "If I told you they did?" he asked. Wilt shrugged. "I'm not in any position to argue," he said. "If you say they do, I take it they do." "They don't," said Inspector Flint. "But that proves nothing." He continued before Wilt could savour his satisfaction. "Nothing at all. We've got 3 people missing. There's Mrs. Wilt at the bottom of that shaft. No, don't say it, Wilt, don't say it. There's Dr. Pringsheim, and there's Mrs. fucking Pringsheim." "I like it," said Wilt appreciatively. "I definitely like it." "Like what?" "Mrs. fucking Pringsheim, it's opposite." "One of these days, Wilt," said the inspector softly, "you'll go too far. Patience-wise, to use a filthy expression?" asked Wilt. The inspector nodded and lit a cigarette. "You know something, Inspector?" said Wilt, beginning to feel on top of the situation. "You smoke too much. Those things are bad for you. You should try—" "Wilt," said the inspector, "in 25 years in the service I have never once resorted to physical violence while interrogating a suspect. But there comes a time and a place, and a suspect, when, with the best will in the world—" He got up and went out. Wilt sat back in his chair and looked up at the fluorescent light. He wished it would stop buzzing. It was getting on his nerves. 12.